Hello and welcome to Mat Yoga. Today the Niyama we'll be discussing is Svadhyaya, which means self-reflection. I invite you to come into a pose which will promote rest and self-reflection. I'm going to move into legs up the wall. Svadhyaya is self-study or reflection. This practice is about knowing your identity. Our brains are incredibly efficient. We form neural pathways that allow us to react without having to consciously think. This is great for mundane tasks, but it limits our awareness and our mindfulness. Unless we examine our patterns, it's easy to fall into reactionary habits that run counter to our values and goals. I'm going to speak a little bit about neuroanatomy. In my process of self-study, learning more about the brain has really helped me to understand why I feel sometimes the way that I do, helps me understand my own habits and patterns. Our brain has two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And much of our sense of identity comes from the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere houses our language centers, our mathematical abilities, our logical areas. The ability to think in a linear fashion comes from the left side of our brain, the left hemisphere. Also, functional MRI machines, which gives us a visualization of the brain as it's working. It shows that our sense of self-awareness, which is referred to as the default mode network, or our ego, it's located typically in the left hemisphere. This is the part of our brain that is most active when we're not really doing anything else, when we're not engaged in a task. That self-chatter that our brain defaults into is that default mode network. Our right hemisphere, on the other hand, takes in information from our sensory systems, and it thinks in pictures. There's no language ability in the right hemisphere. And it functions rather than in a linear manner, it functions in a parallel processing manner. So no time other than the present moment exists in the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is the one that gives us the ability to be one with the energy of the universe. And this is the differences in these two hemispheres, and depending on which one is dominant, will allow us to know which sense of self is really dominant. Is it the logical, task-oriented left hemisphere, or is it the more in-the-moment, experiential, unified right hemisphere? And it can give us an understanding of the physiological basis for the different senses of self we can experience. Another important part of our brain is the limbic system. And the limbic system is a more primitive part of the brain. It contributes to other types of reactions. It has the hippocampus, which is our center for learning and memory. Also the amygdala, which is the seat of our fear and stress responses. The notorious fight or flight response comes from our amygdala. And then also the cingulate gyrus, which regulates our emotions and also our sense of pain. So our bodies can sense and react to situations before our frontal lobe can interpret and respond. Our frontal lobe is the front part of our brain, and this is where our abilities to plan and organize, have expressive language, and intentional movement all comes from our frontal lobe. So this is why sometimes we can do something and think, why on earth did I do that? You know, there's a good chance it might be coming from a more reactionary part of our brain. Maybe we had a story that we came upon when we were a lot younger and it just developed into a neural pathway, and then when we get triggered, we automatically respond in this familiar way. But our brain has the ability to change. Neuroplasticity is the ability to form new neural pathways. So when we notice a pattern, or if you notice a recurring belief, when you become aware of that, See if you can trace it back to the origin. When was the first time you felt that way or thought that story? I encourage you to not be afraid of your shadow side. Often we try to hide the parts of ourselves that we feel aren't acceptable, but when we look at those, we can actually start to be able to make changes once we bring it into awareness. Often we project onto other people anything that we either love or hate about ourselves. So when we're irritated, we can use that sense of disharmony and allow it to provide a prompt for us to look inside. I encourage you to be aware of your belief systems. Belief systems are in place because they help explain things, they explain our world and our place in the world. They can provide numerous helpful benefits, but they also have limitations. So I encourage you to examine your beliefs to see if they're still helpful. Are there any limitations that you can see that may not be serving you anymore? Thank you for spending this time here with me at Mary Beth Yoga.